back, class. Yesterday we gave you an overview of internal and external recruiting. We focused primarily on internal recruiting. Today we're going to finish up the chapter by looking at external recruiting. And we're also going to look at strategies for external recruiting and how we can evaluate the effectiveness of external recruiting. So today we want to take a look at the other resource that you have, which is going outside the organization to find the talent that you're needing. There are a whole lot of advantages by going outside and looking at the vast array of opportunities for people to come in and offer diversity, offer new insight, offer just a different way of thinking for the organization. But it also has its challenges. So today let's take a look at those pros and cons of external recruiting. Well, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to finish up Chapter 6. If you remember, yesterday we took a look at labor pools and applicant pools and internal selection. And today we're going to finish out by looking at external recruiting sources. Now, what are some ways that we can reach an external market? Well, you see here in the slide we have media sources, we have competitive recruiting sources, we have employment agencies, we have labor unions, and we have job fairs and creative recruiting. So we have at our disposal all types of resources to be able to reach an outside market, and we also have at the end of it all educational institutions, which is something that is being looked at more seriously and more focused today, as we're looking for people with specific skills that aren't just readily available in the general population pool. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of external recruiting. You can look at this, but everybody, here's what I've come to realize. With internal recruiting, you have the advantage of bringing in someone who you already know is going to fit the organization. They have the cultural mentality, they have the skill sets, they are not going to be a surprise to you. So with internal selection, you're hiring from within and you're hiring consistency. Now, consistency can be good in that respect, but it can also be a weakness for that organization, especially with organizations that are trying to be innovative and creative and think out of the box. You want to have maybe a fresh set of eyes on what's going on in your organization. Well, if you hire from within, you're just going to perpetuate what is already there, the status quo. So the advantage of external recruiting is to be able to have a fresh set of eyes come in and be able to offer some innovation and change and creativity that might not exist with internal strategic recruiting strategy. But now the disadvantage is, as I said before, you don't know how they're going to turn out. You don't know, just because if they have the technical skills, if they're going to meet the cultural, organizational, the people, organization match requirements for that organization. So both internal and external, as I've said before, have their strengths and weaknesses. I'll let you guys take a look here at the more specific advantages and disadvantages of external recruiting. But just know, with internal, you're pretty much getting the same type of mentality that you've had exist in the organization up to that point. And external, you get innovation and a new, fresh perspective on things, but you don't know how they're going to turn out, which in an internal recruiting strategy, you pretty much can rely on that person to be consistent and more reliable as far as them assimilating into the organization's culture. Now, we mentioned a while ago media sources. Now, here are a few of the considerations when it comes to media sources. You have newspapers, magazines, television, billboards, radio. These can be effective tools. What I learned very early in recruiting is that everything works and then nothing works. It just depends on the circumstances involving that recruiting effort at that time. There are some areas and some strategies where billboards will work, but billboards can be costly, and if they're not placed strategically, then you've pretty much just wasted a whole lot of money. Magazines, you're looking at usually targeted recruiting at that point. If I want engineers, I'm not going to recruit out of Sports Illustrated. I may go to an engineering or popular science magazine or whatever. Newspapers, they're becoming more and more electronically oriented, so that would be a resource. Television is very costly. I remember in the Navy, we had a campaign where we were recruiting for a particular program, and the Navy spent, I think it was $30,000 for one 30-second commercial on a Atlanta Braves baseball game, and that was it. They got 30 seconds for $25,000, $30,000, and the commercial was not shown anymore. So think about the amount of money. Now, folks, if you're going to have a television campaign, you've got to have that commercial on all the time. I mean, take a look at some of these attorneys. You know them by name. Why? Because they're constantly on television. If you had a lawyer come on television one time and that was it, chances are you would never remember that lawyer again. But when you are inundated continually by these lawyers, you start to remember their name, and more importantly, they want you to remember their phone number. And they have these little jingles, one call, that's all, or whatever. So television is effective, but it is very costly. So just make sure you spend your money wisely in that area. Internet media sources, which are ads, videos, webinars, are also used. And then you have the effectiveness of evaluating media ads. Track responses by using different contact names, email addresses, phone codes in each ad. And then you can follow up to know which sources produced employees who stay longer and perform better. So one of the things that I did when I became the Dean of Adult Education for another college was to look at how they spent their advertising money to be able to generate leads and new students. And what I found was the advertising agency that we were using had never differentiated from their strategy, and we were paying them $250,000 a year, and they only produced maybe 5 or 6 leads per year. Folks, that threw up some red flags. So you need to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of your media ads. How much money am I spending in return for the number of applicants or employees or hires that I'm receiving? And if the ratio is not there, you need to look at different ways of advertising. And these advertising companies, especially with corporations and stuff and schools, they will come and they'll, talk to you about what they can do and this, that, and the other. But when recruiting, the bottom line with recruiting is numbers. What are you being able to produce for the amount of money that I'm spending? So that's how you have to evaluate the effectiveness of these media ads. You have other resources here that the slide and the textbook talks about. You have trade associations, trade publications, and competitors. Yeah, if you're going to look for engineers, you would probably want to attend conferences that involve engineers to do hiring. I know Mid-America, whenever the Southern Baptist Convention gets together, we have a booth there to attract students and potential donors. So we're going to place ourselves in the midst of people who have that like interest or affiliation. And then you can have customers can be recruited. You have applications available in store, and you have applications online and in-store kiosk, and these are at those again, trade shows and conferences and conventions and so forth. These are excellent ways that you can attract people. And then you can also have interviews scheduled in the store or in the or at the event and so forth. And then you can have employment announcements and bills and newsletters and so forth that you can hand out. Now, one of the things that you usually find with professional and trade associations and competitors, you find the benefit of being able to network. And we used to call this COI, Centers of Influence. Centers of influence are people who are closest to that applicant pool, people that are closest to the people you're trying to find. These are the ones you want to get to know. This is why at these conferences and trade shows and all of that, people do a whole lot of handshaking and card swapping because you're trying to get to know the people who are the source of information and referrals and so forth, and you want to try to get on their good side and win them over so that when you follow up with them or you talk to them or they call you, hey, I have someone who I think would be good for your company, they're doing the recruiting for you. And that's really, folks, the key to recruiting. Instead of you having to go out and beat the bushes for people, it's best to have other people do it for you. Those are your COIs. Those are your referrals. Those are the people who know these individuals, who have the closest contact with them and can get in there with them and be able to plug your company. And oftentimes, by the time you talk to them, they're waiting for you to call. So competitive recruiting sources is a good way of being able to find quality people and also people who can help you recruit better and more effectively. Employment agencies, you probably are familiar with employment agencies. There's all types out there that will find people. And also you have headhunters. Now, headhunters are normally people who go after professionals, executives, and managerial type of people. Headhunters make a whole lot of money. It's rare for them, a good headhunter, it's rare for them not to make at least 6 figures a year. But they're constantly going and they're constantly on the move. They live out of a hotel room after hotel room, but they are compensated very well for their efforts. But they bring the top talent to organizations too. So there is a trade-off there. And headhunters, they're a group of people, like I said, who look for specific people, normally professionals and managerial people. And oftentimes, if you're in that type of arrangement, if you are that type of person, then you can submit to these headhunting organizations your curriculum vitae or your resume, and they may contact you and be an agent for you. So headhunters are a good way of finding top quality people for these top level positions. And then contingency firms charge after candidate is hired, and then retainer firms charge a set fee with or without hire. So you have different options there that you can choose from if you want to go with an outsourced recruiting agency. Now, labor unions, you can also find your pool from labor unions who have a list of people normally who are in that union who may be qualified. They know the people, they know the jobs that they're qualified to do and so forth, so you can use them. Job fairs. Job fairs are okay, but I'll be honest with you, most of the job fairs that I've attended in the past, just looking at them, they're looking for truck drivers, they're looking for really let's go to work right now, manual labor type of work. You may have people like Enterprise, who is a good organization. They're a good organization. Don't get me wrong, Enterprise is very good, but these job fairs really, truck drivers, things like that, they're looking for a lot of people, a lot of the times, who are just ready to go to work right now. They don't require any special skills or anything like that, and if your organization is like that, it's a good place to go. But they bring the employers and the potential job candidates together. You can fill out your application there oftentimes, and then you have virtual job fairs, and these are just job fairs online. Now, one of the things that I said earlier is attracting the attention now more with recruiters and staffing is the resource that come from our educational institutions in recruiting. Colleges and universities, they're significant sources of employees. In fact, many times organizations are going in when a student first gets into college and they find out their major, and they work with them throughout their time in college to develop them and mentor them and bring them along, so that when they graduate, they already have a person ready to go to work. They look for those desirable attributes such as a GPA and experience. A lot of times, whenever you're looking for a job, it's not just the education they're looking for, but they also want experience, depending on the job. It's not always like that, but oftentimes if you have the GPA and the experience, you're in there. So GPA it doesn't make a difference a lot of times about the degree, depending on where you're at, but your GPA, especially in academics, if you're going to work in college or whatever, they want to know what your GPA was. Internships provide experience that's important to employers. A lot of times the company will let you come and intern during the summer, which means you work usually for little or nothing, but instead of pay, you're getting the experience and you're getting your foot in the door. And what I try to tell people today is, as tight as the labor market is right now, if you know of a company you want to work for eventually, then there's nothing wrong with going in and approaching them and asking them if you could be an intern in that company. And while you're getting your education, you can be working for them voluntarily or as an intern and getting experience, so that when you get your education, they already know you and you're the prime candidate that will propel you to the very first or at the top of the list. So I would consider internships wherever you might want to work. Schools recruiting from high school and vocational schools are recruited, especially students with particular skills. Votech is not something that I see a whole lot of in high school anymore. We used to have it when I was growing up, but I don't know how prevalent it is today in our school systems. But if it's not, it needs to be brought back, because they teach skills that you can learn, and really when you graduate, you're ready to go to work. Instead of going to college, a lot of people opted out for that, and they make very good incomes. They make a very good living out of that. But a lot of organizations today are looking at universities and schools and so forth to be able to recruit talent out of. Now, you hear about evaluation and metrics. You've heard it throughout this course so far about assessing and evaluating the effectiveness of your strategies when it comes to pretty much everything in HR. And here are some evaluations efforts when it comes to recruiting: evaluating the quality and quantity, the recruiting satisfaction, the time required to fill openings, and the cost of recruiting. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And this is pretty much the same thing, it's just in a diagram. Now, when it comes to general recruiting metrics, you have what's called a yield ratio. Now, what's a yield ratio? The yield ratio, as you see, is a comparison of the number of applicants at one stage of recruiting with the number at the next stage. So let's say, for instance, you have a whole pool of people that you contacted, and from all of those contacts, you have the next stage, which may be potential candidates, let's say. Well, that's your yield ratio. And then from there you would go from potential candidates to serious candidates, and then applicants, and then selectees, and then new hires. Going from one step to the next is what you're yielding. It's a ratio that you yield, and it's a really an indication of how many people it takes for you to get to the point where you're filling the required quota for that organization. Selection ratio is the percentage hired from a given group of candidates, and acceptance rate, and that's the percentage of applicants hired divided by the total number of offered jobs. And then the success base rate is the longer term measure of recruiting effectiveness. It is the success rate of applicants. So the longer term measure, which you're looking at, what is my long-term strategy, and is it producing the number of applicants that I need? And let me go over here to this figure 6.4 to kind of explain it. We used to have this in recruiting when I was recruiting for the military. Now, we had another name for it, but essentially it was what you see right here. We had a quota each month of, let's say, 3 people per recruiter. That means every month each recruiter had to recruit 3 individuals into the Navy, or in my case the Navy Reserve. Now, I just didn't go haphazardly and try to just talk to any and everybody and not know how many calls I needed to make or contacts I needed to make. Well, we had a system in place that would gauge how many phone calls we needed to make to get the number of interviews that we needed to accomplish, to get the number of candidates who were willing or at least interested in moving forward, to get to the application stage, which meant that they were fully qualified physically, medically, police background check, and all of that, to the number of people who actually made it down to get their physical and pass the drug screening and pass the police checks, to eventually getting to where they would swear in to the military. Now, as you see here, you have at the bottom a total initial contact number of what? Of 100. So that means you start out with 100. And if you notice here, this person has a ratio here, total contracts, of 5%. That means if that person had a quota of 5 each month, then that person would have to have 100 contacts to get to 30 formal applicants, to have 15 final interviewees, to get down to 10 offer recipients, to eventually get to where 5 of them would be hired. So that's the ratio for this particular example. And if you were a good recruiter, you could probably, if your quota was 3, you could probably make 25, 30 phone calls a month, screen the people on the phone, get a good vibe with them, and from 30 phone calls, you could get 3 actual enlistees each month. And this is on average. It's not a science, but on average. But I have known some recruiters that would have to make 100 and 150 phone calls just to be able to get 3 applicants. So these yield ratios really is the amount of contacts that you need to make to be able to yield the number of people that are required by that organization to fill. So this is a kind of a handy tool for you if you're taking a look at how many people I need to reach to be able to meet the demands of my organization. You can follow this formula. Now, you have resume mining, applicant tracking. Resume mining is just going in electronically. You can do electronic searches for resumes. Applicant tracking, employer career websites, international mobility, realistic job previews. All of these things will help to increase recruiting effectiveness, and I suggest you use all of them, because any and everything works when it comes to being able to increase the number of people that you are trying to reach. Now, recruiting effectiveness can be increased by using the evaluation data to target different applicant pools. You're not going to just draw from one source. Recruiting involves multiple sources, and knowing where those multiple sources exist and going after them. Change recruiting methods. Sometimes I have used the phone on months to recruit. I've also gone out to job fairs and career fairs, and those have generated responses. I've gone to schools and given presentations. That's generated responses. I've also just gone out on the street and talked to people, and that's generated responses. So, and we've also used advertising through television and newspapers and magazines and so forth. So there are all different types of resources you can use to help you increase your effectiveness. And as I said before, anything and everything can be used when you're trying to draw people into your organization. Improve internal handling and interviewing of applicants. Train recruiters and managers. And then recruiters can emphasize positive aspects of the job and the employer. So these are some of the fundamentals of internal and external recruiting. And I recommend that as an HR professional, if you're going into staffing, which is a lucrative field, but it's a very demanding field, that you become familiar with all of these resources and things that are available to you, and utilize all of them to be able to make sure you're meeting your organization's staffing goals. Well, as we finish out this chapter, I hope you've gained a better understanding of what it means to recruit both internally and externally. Now, some of the things that I want you to remember today is the technology. Technology is probably one of the most cost-effective and quickest and easiest way to reach people, to let them know about your organization, and to be able to identify people. Make sure you use it, whether it's social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, LinkedIn. Make sure you're making use of those social media outlets. And also there's the old-fashioned way of just getting out and getting to know people, networking. Professional organizations, unions, people who are incumbents, who may know other people who are within the realm of the expertise that you're looking for. Make use of all of it. It's only going to make you more productive and make your career a whole lot simpler and easier. Until next time, God bless you, and we'll resume with Chapter 7.